Hi, and welcome to this pre-recorded version of the OpenUp Masterclass. Enjoy!
Welcome, everybody. All right, we're going to get right to it. So, as Romain said, I'm a former professional athlete, and I'm now a neuroscientist. I also teach about performance and neuroscience, the neuroscience of music, but also the neuroscience of performance at the Conservatory of Amsterdam to the master's and bachelor students there. And that job is really fun. It's really great because it's a combination of everything that I've been working towards for the last decade. I have practical experience with motivation, obviously, habit forming, and stress resilience from my time as a professional athlete. I spent, like 15 years learning about it as a neuroscientist now, having gotten my PhD in neuroscience in 2023. And what better way to combine those two experiences than to help professional classical musicians train better, sleep better, feel better at the Conservatory of Amsterdam. So it's kind of a dream position for me. So that's where I'm coming from. And so what this class is going to be something a little different than what I think you think it's going to be. And it has to do with the world that we live in right now. We live in a crazy world, right? Essentially, what we have before us is an infinite warehouse, an infinite hardware store of tools for wellness. An infinite wellness hardware store where every shelf is offering you a new tip, a new trick, a new strategy, a new possible way of improving your motivation, improving your habit forming, reducing stress, right? It's a wild world out there. And you can access it all, right? There is a river of social media, right? Being fed by an ocean of information on the internet about this topic. And now we have in your pocket an artificial intelligence that can distill all the information from that ocean and from that river into an interactive shell that you can talk with. You can include your own details and data from your life. And it will actively, with quite a lot of intelligence and reasoning using GPT-5, come up with a schedule and a structure for you to improve on these aspects. That is amazing, and it begs the question, why am I here? Like, why are you listening to me right now in your pockets or on your table or somewhere within a meter vicinity of you, likely, is a magic tool that will give you an interactive, very deeply and well-educated list of, and structure of perfect advice to create a schedule for you. So why am I here? What can I offer you that you don't already have? It's a good question. I was thinking about it on the way over here. Well, for one thing, these systems, they're a little sycophantic, right? Sam Altman, GPT-5 guy, he says they glaze you. In other words, they're trying to make you feel better. In other words, they're trying to accommodate what you want in their responses. And today, I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to accommodate what you want. A lot of my advice I'm going to give you and a lot of stuff we're going to talk about today is controversial at best and maybe downright dreary at worst. But I think it's important to go through anyways. So I am going to try to give you a very straight up and very clear interpretation from my experience as a professional athlete and as a neuroscientist of what truly matters in this endless warehouse of wellness strategies and improvements, hopeful advice to help you improve in all of these matters. So in this section, we're going to go through what I think matters, what truly matters, looking at it from the perspective through the prism of my time as a neuroscientist and my time as a professional athlete. What matters less, what's far less important, could be helpful, but it matters a lot less. And I don't think currently in our modern conception of this, in our society, we understand that difference well enough. So the third thing that I'm going to try to do is help you with telling the difference between these two things. So in the infinite hardware store of wellness, there are things that are unmissable. They are essential. They are pivotal to your success. They are the tools that we all use, whenever we're trying to fix something about ourselves. They are the true foundation. And then there's a bunch of tools that you almost never use, but you did buy, and they cost probably a lot more than the cheaper tools that you're looking at right now. But you have them, and every once in a while you use them. And when you bought them, did you really think that they were that useless? When you bought them, these specialized tools, you thought to yourself, I'm going to be using this all the time, right? And in the end, you're always going back to the hammer, the vice grip, maybe not the Stanley knife, but in my view, it's super useful, and the screwdriver. And so, in my experience as a professional athlete, I think I got a really good look at what is distilled down the most important things for performance, for motivation, and for success in this space. And those things, I think, are much more important than all the rest of the useless paraphernalia around it. Even though I think in society, we have this conception that those things are very important. So let me give you an example. In sports, you might think that holding to a very specific and exactly structured diet is extremely important. But it turns out that due to the big individual differences between people's metabolism, it's not as important as you think, and it's definitely not as homogeneous as you think. It's not as similar as you think between athletes. In fact, in my personal experience on my professional team, some of you might know speed skating, or probably a lot of you don't, but one of my colleagues is quite a famous and successful speed skater. His name is Erben, and Erben Wennemars, he would eat like 10 chocolate bars a week on his during our sports camps. And another guy who's equally good, also an Olympic champion, if he looked at a cookie, he would already gain like half a pound. So massive differences between individuals within this tiny little space of sports. And therefore, the idea of focusing all your time and energy on diet in the way that we assume athletes do isn't 100% reflective of what it's actually about, what's actually important, the things that actually matter. The point I'm trying to make is that the things that actually matter, they are for sure are going to be the things that all the athletes are doing, and they're roughly all doing them in the same way. One speed skating team, one professional speed skating team, or one professional running team, they may do a lot of calisthenic jumps and exercises around the running track, or maybe sprints on the bike. And then another one may be doing a very different set of exercises. And yet when they come together to compete against each other, it's been my experience that they all skate almost exactly the same speed. Now that can be due to two things. One, the almost impossibly unlikely scenario that every time a sports team tries a new thing, it turns out to be not only effective, but also exactly as effective as the thing the other team is doing. Maybe that's happening. Definitely not. Or it just is the case that these things matter a lot less than we think they matter. That the variance in the model of performance is just not predicted that strongly by these little extra fun things that we always describe as so important. Whether it's aspects of diet, aspects of the structure of the training, the exact form of periodization. So is the athlete supposed to train for 3 weeks really hard and take 1 week of rest? Or should they take 2 weeks of super intense training and then 2 weeks of rest maybe, or maybe 4 weeks and then only a half a week of rest? Well, I know that in the speed skating world and in many other sports contexts where the physiological strength is very important, all three of these are being tried at the same time, and then the skaters come to the competition. They all skate the same speed. So, obviously, these things matter less than we think they do. But there are, in my view, 4 things within the professional sports world that all athletes do, and they do them extremely well, better than anyone else. And these 4 things are also the 4 things that I believe will make the vast majority of difference to your life when it comes to improving your levels of motivation, your work ethic, your general health, your mental well-being, and your levels of stress. These 4 things are, in my view, 90% of the battle. Everything else is gravy. Sleep, obviously. Movement for the athletes, obviously an insane amount of movement and exercise for athletes, but this is essential. To the mental health of athletes generally, I think their exercise schedules are doing an amazing amount of work to keep them mentally healthy and reduce their levels of stress. Emotional regulation in the form of, well, many things, but meditation is a good example of this, but also like a nature walk can be a good example of this. Various strategies relating to breathing exercises is a good example of this. I put under emotional regulation an umbrella of all of the strategies you use to reduce your parasympathetic nervous system, increase your parasympathetic nervous system, reduce your sympathetic nervous system. In other words, increasing your level of the hormones relating to recovery and lowering stress, decreasing the levels of hormones like cortisol and adrenaline that are causing stress and they're making you feel emotional intensity. It's not necessarily a negative thing, but emotional intensity needs to be broken by emotional regulation. And the way to do that are 1, sleep, and 2, emotional regulation. And finally, love. Love is incredibly important for professional athletes. Throughout my entire career, one of the most important negotiations the coaches always had with us was how much time can they give us with our family, with our friends, with our loved ones. And they gave us as much time as possible, even to the point where sometimes, and you'll see this in many professional sports contexts, the family comes with for a little while. In the hardest moments of our training schedule, where we were doing the trainings that were preparing us for the competitions that were the most intense, the ones where every second training you're vomiting, for example. During those training camps, the family was allowed to come for particular periods, and that was done very conscientiously, even though sometimes the family included young kids, and sometimes those young kids were little hellions causing unbelievable chaos around our practices sometimes. But we didn't mind. We actually kind of liked it because we knew how important it was to have these people around us. These 4 things, these are not only the things that make the difference in the professional sports world, how well these 4 are done. They're also the same things that can make a huge difference in your own life. It's not that we're doing something very different in the top sport world. We're just doing the things better. We're doing sleep at an extremely high level, movement obviously at an extremely high level with a huge volume, but also emotional regulation. So one of the superpowers of the best athletes that I've ever worked with was dropping off. After a period where you are at an extreme high level of emotional intensity, where you're at an extremely high level of arousal emotionally and physiologically after a race, the best performers, the best athletes that I've ever known, and in my team we had, for example, Sven Kramer, Nijenhuis, Carl Verheyen, Jochem Uitdagen, just to name 4 multi Olympic gold medalists. One of the things that typified them more than anything else was their capacity to go from 100% arousal to drop off almost completely to 0 and go into recovery mode at an extremely high pace. They were naturally talented at this sort of thing. It's to a degree a natural talent to be able to do this. And And on the other hand, there are techniques and things you can do to get better at it. But the first thing to realize, thing to realize here is that these 4 things are the most, in my view, the most important things. If you can do these right, you are 90% of the way there. Now, in spite of the fact that there's really only 4 tools in this belt, what we're looking at here is, as I said before, an endless hardware store of tips and tricks and strategies and things that you can do, right? So how is it that we live in a world where I've essentially just said it's all about these 4 things, and yet we are inundated by an endless stream of strategies and tips and tricks? What is going on here? Well, one way to look at this is to think about it this way. A lot of the strategies and the science and the psychology and the social media platforms and the social media influencers, a lot of these people, they're not really talking about the most important tools. What they spend most of their time talking about are the tools for tools. They're talking about tools to fix tools. Tools for tools is where the vast majority of the content and the vast majority of the interest is being directed. Now, what do I mean by tools for tools? Let's take, for example, a great book. No shade on James Clear. It's a great book, and it has a lot of super useful things in it, no doubt about it. But a book like Atomic Habits by James Clear, the vast majority of the examples in this book are often trying to promote certain behaviors, like, for example, movement and exercise, right? And the strategies that they employ to help people, are not around talking about movement and exercise. They're about tools that you can use in order to use the tool of exercise more effectively. 1 degree of separation, right? So, how do you exercise more? Well, maybe reward hacking is one of the things that James Clear talks about. The idea that you take something positive and you try to get it as close as you can in time and space to the negative thing, the hard thing, doing your exercise as you can, so that your brain starts to associate the one with the other. Hopefully, over a longer period of time, that association becomes stronger, and so when you think about exercise, you think about the positive thing as well. Now, that is a tool for a tool. But here is the thing about tools for tools, right? They sound great oftentimes, but they're often less reliably useful than we think. And one of the reasons is that we are very different individually. We are very different people. And the usefulness of these tools becomes watered down and harder to measure the further it gets from the core of what we need. We need to move. That's 100% true. Do we need to reward hack to move? Maybe. Some people do. Some people do more than others. Some people's personality is very indicative of whether this sort of thing works. If you have very high extroversion, that means you also have higher reward sensitivity. People with higher reward sensitivity, reward hacking will work much better for them because the positive effect of the reward is higher, so it'll have a stronger association with a negative thing. If you have very low extroversion, more of an introvert, right? Reward hacking won't work as effectively. So there's massive individual differences between people when it comes to thinking about tools for tools. 1 degree of separation, 1 degree of abstraction between the thing you need and this new wonderful little product that you can take off the shelf in the endless warehouse of wellness that's going to make all the difference for you. And that is important to realize. That is the difference between what matters and what matters less. So now we understand a little bit better what matters and what matters less and how to tell the difference. Now, there's another incentive in this whole game of wellness communication, wellness platforms. There's another incentive here. And the incentive is to not make you feel bad while you're listening to me talk about this stuff. So if you're a former professional athlete who has a degree in neuroscience and you're teaching, how do you do this? Well, you talk about tools to fix tools that have some association with sports and that are fun and nice, right? You do that so that while you're listening to me, you feel better. You think you're getting something useful from me. And you hope that it improves your life. So you talk about reward hacking, for example, because that sounds kind of fun, and you get a reward as in addition to the thing that you're going to start doing more. You can talk about getting up earlier in the morning. You can talk about something a little bit more neutral, but also kind of fun and positive, like visualization. I'm sure all of you know of the book, The Secret, the biggest lying book in history, in my humble opinion, when it comes to the idea that all you have to do is visualize what you want and then you're going to get it. I don't think so. But all of these strategies and techniques, they have something to do with sports, they seem to work. They're a tool that fixes tool. So I just have to talk about these, and then you guys are happy, I'm happy, and then we leave and everyone's happy. But there's a problem there, right? And the problem is this. The problem is that you take this tool off the shelf in the warehouse of wellness, right? You implement it into your life, all full of hope and happiness that this is going to make the big difference. This is going to change everything. After the honeymoon period of about a week and a half of doing it, right, you tell yourself, oh my God, this is going so well. And so you continue to do it for the next 2 months, and before you know it, you're asking yourself, does this actually help at all? Is this actually making that big of a difference in my life? And the answer is inevitably, almost always, no, it's not. Because it was never going to make that big of a difference. It was never going to make all the difference in the world that you thought it was going to make. It's really no different than if you go into a real hardware store, you buy one of these new-fandangled tools you think is going to make all the difference, and you use it once or twice, and then it ends up in the back of the garage and you never use it again. So I have told you all of the most important information I'm going to tell you in this class right now. I've told you what matters. I've told you what matters less. And I've told you what the difference is. But I'm not going to leave it there. I want to give you a few tools to fix tools of my own. Because the truth of the matter is that yes, they are fun. Yes, they do work. They just don't work as much as everyone thinks they work. And they don't work as much for some people as for others. But they do work, right? James Clear's tips do help people. There's no question about it. It's just that I don't think we see this in perspective. And so I'm trying to give you that perspective. But instead of giving you the feel-good tools that are good for a TED Talk, make you guys feel good, and are just good news in general, I'm going to shed some light on some of the tools for tools that are less talked about, some of the less desirable and more ignored tools for tools. Here's the first one. Be scared more. Okay, to be clear, these are more hyperbolic and a little bit comedic, so don't take them too seriously and literally. But on the other hand, be scared more. What do I mean by that? If we look at the neuroscience of learning, if we look at the neuroscience of the fancy word for learning, neuroplasticity, right? What we're talking about is how quickly our brains change. Well, it turns out that, yes, dopamine helps your brain change. So if you want your brain to change like James Clear wants your brain to change, in other words, put a reward beside your workout and your brain will change, creating a greater association between that reward and the workout, so you'll do the workout more. Yes, that's great. But your brain doesn't just need dopamine. It doesn't just need reward hormones to change. Your brain also needs stress hormones to change. Introducing more stress, excitement, a kind of physiological arousal that we sometimes call fear, into instances where you're trying to learn something very difficult and challenging will make you learn it faster. Things have to matter. The thing that your brain cares about the most is salience. It cares about whether something means something in your world. And to make something mean something, you can make yourself very desirable of it, right, with dopamine. But to make something mean something even more, you also make yourself a little scared. So introduce fear as one of the things that you use to create the highest moments of your day, to create those moments of high intensity so that your learning increases. Another thing that really helps is to suffer more. Suffer is a loaded term, I understand, but you understand what I mean. What I mean is struggle more. Introduce struggling into the process of learning something difficult. However unpleasant it is, a nice portion of struggle is going to make you learn something faster. When I teach how professional musicians can increase the speed of their learning on their instrument, I spend some of the time talking about rewards, but I spend a lot of the time talking about please, make it hard. Make it really hard and really uncomfortable for yourself. It is going to help you a lot. Serotonin, cortisol, adrenaline, these hormones related to struggle, frustration, and fear of failure should be there as part of the concoction of dopamine and other reward-related hormones to make you learn faster. And what this means is that sometimes, as you see here, you shouldn't trust your feelings. Trust the process. Because sometimes you may think to yourself, this is too scary. And the fact of the matter is that that may be true. But it also might be equally likely that your feelings are lying to you, and that what you really have to do is, for a moment, don't trust your feelings, trust the schedule and the structure that you put out before you. And very often, that is going to be the right move. People think that professional sports teams are constantly listening to how the athletes feel and think in order to make the next decision about what they should be doing. And that could be no farther from the truth. That couldn't be farther from the truth, is what I meant to say. It is not true that athletes are taking their heart rate variability and their wellness from their whoop, their cortisol, salivary cortisol levels, their lactate levels from their blood tests, their general wellness levels, their VO2 max, their psychological wellness levels, taking all these pieces of information, taking them in, and then deciding what to do the next day. That's not what's happening at all. The schedules are extremely rigid and structured, and only in the most problematic and difficult cases, only then do we deviate from the process. That is still how all professional sports work. I quit skating in 2011, and I went to a good friend of mine recently who was on my team and was an Olympic skater himself. And his son is now competing at the top level of the sport. His name is Joep Venemars, and he is winning world championships just like his dad did. And I asked him, I said, how much has this actually changed? Like, how much has changed? He's like, Beorn, I'll tell you, the actual schedules are almost exactly the same. So little has changed. And that is truly indicative of how important it is to stay within a structure, even though emotionally it might not be the most comfortable thing. And one of the best ways to stay within a structure is to live like a monk, to be very ascetic. And that's not always fun. I remember it like yesterday, so many of my teammates, the job of a really good coach, of a good professional coach, is to tell everybody to chill. You don't get to an Olympic level not having the motivation to murder yourself on the course, on the running track, on the skating rink every single day. I know for a fact that there's nobody in my team, including myself, who wasn't willing to literally go until complete and utter physiological failure, vomiting, passing out, anytime our coaches asked us to. Our coach's job was to tell us to stop most of the time. One of the hardest things our coaches had was the job of telling us how to rest, getting us to rest more, getting us to leave the hallway of the hotels during the World Cup, stop talking about technique. Stop talking about the best way to sharpen our skates, and literally just stop. Living like a monk and resting, truly deeply resting, is actually really hard work. It's very difficult. Shutting off is extremely hard to do, but it is the other side of this incredibly important amplitude wave of activity that you should try to enter in your life. So to sum up my tools to fix tools for you, my tools to fix tools are, I know all of you are already deeply desirous and on the dopamine train. If not via the social media, then hopefully trying to accomplish something interesting and difficult in your life that is, worthwhile. I know that you guys got the dopamine covered. Include more fearful and scary things in those moments suprêmes, in those supreme and important moments. And also in the moments where you're practicing and preparing for those moments. Try to psych yourself out a little bit. Create a little bit of fear, a little bit of tension. Put something on the line. Create stakes, right? That will boost not only the hormones related to reward, but also the hormones related to arousal and intensity, excitement, a little bit of fear, and that will make you learn faster. And the second piece of advice is get good. Get really good at going from 100 to 0 as fast and as effective as you can. And there's no better way to do that in your lives, whatever you're trying to do, there's no better way to do that than to increase the regularity and the effectiveness of your exercise schedule, get deeper, far more effective sleep, and engage at least 20 minutes a day once you start to get into this, 3 or 4 times a week with some form of mindfulness. And we talked about there's various different forms of this. These basics are exactly what we did as professional athletes, and they made a huge amount of difference in our performance. Those were the things we were really good at. And I don't have to tell you how to do the movement, the sleep, and the mindfulness. I certainly don't have to tell you how to love your family and your friends, although with this social media age, maybe I actually do, but I'm not going to. But for these first 3, right, very easily you can get very good advice on ChatGPT. But just so that we're clear, I'm going to give you the super speed run on these 3 things. The 3 things, movement, sleep, and mindfulness. Movement, you can do many things, but the baseline should be 30 minutes to 45 minutes of type 2 cardio. What is type 2 cardio? Are you breathing hard, pretty hard? Can you talk to someone? Yes. Do you want to talk to them? No. That's type 2 cardio. 45 minutes, minimum 3 times a week. That accounts for the vast majority of the variance of general health outcomes that we know of for exercise for you. Yes, if you don't want to break your hip when you're 80, it's a good idea to put resistance training in there as well. But for the stress reduction and the longevity, low type 2 cardio, 30 to 45 minutes, 3 to 4 times a week is perfect. When it comes to sleep, guess what, guys? It's not that hard. 7.5 hours to 9 hours, almost everybody fits within that distribution. The idea that there's a bunch of people out there who can sleep 4 hours and succeed, no, they're like 1 in 1,000. 7.5 to 9 hours, simple. When should you sleep? At night. Human beings are diurnal. We have a circadian rhythm. We're supposed to be asleep at night and awake in the morning. Many of you might know adrenaline. When you look at the sun, you form more adrenaline. You inhibit melatonin, makes you less sleepy. At night, melatonin goes up, adrenaline goes down when there's no sunlight. Andrew Huberman, despite all his flaws, is 100% right about that one. So, it's quite simple. This is what matters. Tools to fix tools matter a lot less. Do them if you think it's fun. Realize there's massive individual difference between people. From my experience, through the prism of sports and neuroscience, I can tell you that this is what matters less, and that is the difference between them. Thank you.
Yeah, Beorn, thank you so much for all of these insights. I think very interesting point also to say, basically say like, stick to the basics, and like these things are so much more important than all of these like little tips and tricks that everyone's constantly talking about, and also they're just hyper commercialized as well, and people are trying to make money off of them. So focus on those basics, and that's actually how you.
I don't think people realize how amazingly close the overhyped consumer market for useless goods is, and the overhyped consumer market for almost useless tips and tricks in the wellness industry are. But they're very, very similar. And in the end, we always go back to the same things, whether in the consumer market or in this space as well.
Yeah.
In my job teaching about this at the Conservatory of Amsterdam, over the last 7 years, I talk about fewer and fewer things. I just talk about those things more and more because I know how important they are relative to those other things.
Yeah, really, really interesting advice. A bunch of questions came in, so I would like to use some time also for these. One question came in by Julio, and he asks, how do we introduce the said fear into regular activities? You shared that as a tip, like make it more exciting, make it more fearful.
Yeah.
How can we do that in regular activities?
So for example, with the students at the conservatory, anybody who's performed knows sometimes it's scarier to perform for 5 people than for 5,000. And a lot of them decide to practice just on their own. And I will organize little instances where they will come to class with their instrument and perform in front of their greatest critics. So when it comes to this sort of thing, human beings are naturally deeply social. Even the least social humans among us, even the hermits, have a deep social aspect to them as well. Finding your peers, making them sit in front of you, people whose opinion you care about, and then doing the thing that you are afraid of doing in front of them is a great way to create fear.
Yeah, it sounds scary already.
Yeah, exactly. It's great.
Yeah. Thank you. I think that's a really good one, and also you can easily incorporate, of course, in whatever field you're working in.
Yeah.
Then we're going into the next question, and that one is one by Elena, and she says, I understand that we need to do the 4 things you mentioned, but I'm wondering how does one take the first step to generate the momentum and make everything more sustainable? So, what's the first step to work on those 4?
Well, generally I'm quite a stoic person, but I think that stoicism is actually a really important thing to grow within yourself. And one of the key precincts of one of the key edicts of stoicism is the idea that discomfort is actually important, right? And so in this sense, I'm going to take a page a little bit out of the psychology relating to this issue, and I'm going to say, listen, the first thing you have to do is acknowledge the feelings you're having. And I do this every morning. I just got back from Canada. That's why I go to relax. We still have our property there in Canada, and I have to help my 80-year-old mom with cutting down trees and stuff like that. I'm exhausted because of this jet lag, but I did get up this morning and work out, and every fiber of my being was telling me not to do that. I sat for a moment. I had an internal conversation about how terrible and miserable I felt. I went through a process where I entered into a mindful state. I distanced myself from those emotions. I recognized what those emotions were for what they were. And then I quietly engaged in a new dialogue where I made it clear to myself that those emotions were not me. Those emotions were not going to control my actions. And that the inevitable result of going on that run was going to be that I was going to feel better and I was going to thank myself for it. And my partner, Lysandra, is a huge introvert. And I love her for it. And so I'm out being social much more often than she is. But she does have to be social sometimes, and she knows that's true. And so after 15 to 20 minutes of negotiation, when I finally convinced her to come out with me to see my friends, inevitably when we're on the way back, she'll tell me, I'm really happy that you convinced me to come. I had a great time. And this is something we all recognize. This is the difference between the emotions we recognize in the moment, being able to take distance through forms of mindfulness that allow us to recognize that those emotions do not define us, and the understanding that in the long arc of this instance, of this moment, of this exercise, of this going out to see friends, we're going to be thankful for making the right decision. That's my technique. That's my strategy.
Yeah, thank you for for sharing that one. I think it's a very interesting also to look at these things and then kind of separate from your thoughts in that way, and then to kind of what they always do in meditation as well, you know, where you see the thoughts go by as clouds and then look at them, but not always take them seriously. Sometimes maybe you should, but also not always. And
what's important to realize here is that we're talking about a tool to fix a tool. I just gave you my tool to fix the tool. The tool is being social, right? The tool to fix the tool is convincing yourself that it's a good idea and talking with Lysandra for 20 minutes in order to make sure this happens. But the point to realize is that this tool is untrustworthy because it doesn't work for everybody. And it's really hard to measure. So not only does science know less about it, but it's really hard to apply to your life. And that's why I'm so skeptical about it, right? Like I could come here cheering from the rooftops, giving you all, becoming part of the problem of this endless river of tools to fix tools that everybody is announcing is the next best thing since sliced bread. And then people go out and they try it and they realize it doesn't really work for me very well. How often does this happen? So often. So the point is, as soon as I start talking like this, hopefully if I've done my job in this lecture, you realize, oh, he's talking about a tool to fix a tool. I don't know if that's going to work. I'm skeptical, right? It might work, but it might not. So,
yeah. Thank you for that answer. Then there's also a question by Anna, and she asks, do you think there might be a difference how these things work for men and women? Do you know anything about that from
yes,
the field?
I know a lot about that because my research is partly into emotional neuroscience relating to individual differences, and there are obviously big individual differences that fall along the lines of sex. Of course, these are overlapping distributions, so there are a lot of women who identify as female, who have female sexual characteristics, who sit far further on the distribution than men do in the other direction for these traits. So when we start talking about men and women, I immediately I'm like, okay, I'd love to talk about the differences between men and women. Give me 25 minutes to explain parametric statistics and the actual differences between people and how the distributions overlap, and then we'll talk about them. But yes, of course there are differences, but maybe an even more interesting difference to talk about is the difference in personality between somebody, for example, has high neuroticism and low neuroticism, right? Neuroticism is the personality trait that represents someone's sensitivity to negative experiences and emotions, right? Mm-hmm. This is an extremely important trait when it comes to some of the tools that I told you to use, some of the tools for tools that I told you to use. For example, I said, be scared more. Sure. But if you have super high neuroticism, the level of fear that's going to create that neuroplasticity is maybe 10 times lower than someone with really low neuroticism. Mm-hmm. So if someone has really low neuroticism, and we've talked about it in a consultancy context with a professional musician, sometimes I'll ask them to say, sometimes I'll give them the advice, why don't you do 5 minutes of comedy at a stand-up comedy store? Like, terrifying, right? Yeah. If they have really high extroversion and really low neuroticism, bombing, which they inevitably will do because stand-up comedy is impossible, won't cause them to have the same level of negative experience that somebody with really high neuroticism. So for somebody with really high neuroticism, it might be just pick 3 of your best friends who will love you forever despite how bad you do and ask them to be there to create this fearful moment for yourself. So these differences, these individual differences are massive. And that's the reason why I'm so skeptical of tools to fix tools when they're treated like a one-size-fits-all. Because they're really, really not. And that's not good if you're trying to make a business. Because if you want to make a business, you're trying to sell the same product to everybody. Because selling a different product to everybody that's individually specific, that's not a good business model.
Yeah,
right?
That makes sense. But what is interesting is that you say like the 4 basic things, those are important to everyone. Like everyone wants love, movement, sleep, emotional regulation, but the way in which you can accomplish these things might be very different for everyone, and the way you infuse fear or use fear or those kind of things.
That's where we are. That's as far as we are. Anybody who's trying to push further than that is either selling you snake oil or you just get really lucky because the things that they're selling you just so happen to be the right things. But the basics, Those are the fundamentals. Those are the most important things. If you focus all your time on getting 80% of the way for these 4 things, with whatever strategies you can dream up, you are probably going to do way better for yourself than if you pick 100 of these tools to fix tools and try to apply them all to your life. Because changing things is super hard at the best of times.
Yeah. Beorn, we run out of time. Thank you so much for being here today and for sharing all of these insights. I think a very down-to-earth and also good refresher of the things that like really matter, instead of focusing on all of these little things and reading 5 more books about specific strategies that...
you can make it a full-time job.
Yeah, exactly.
Wellness can become a full-time job if you're not careful. All right.
Yeah,
thank you.
Thank you so much. Also for the people at home, thank you so much for watching. I really hope you gained some insights today and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.